De Niro, a legend of cinema, has built an incredibly great legacy with unforgettable roles, from the dark Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver to the cold-hearted Jimmy Conway in Goodfellas. With 82 films, 2 Oscars, and global box office earnings exceeding $5 billion, he has become a symbol of world cinema. However, this illustrious career was not without its decline. De Niro, once the pride of Hollywood, now faces irreparable failures. Once again, he finds himself at the center of criticism, not just from critics, but also from the very audience he once captivated. If you find this story intriguing and want to learn more about unexpected and inspiring journeys, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future exciting content. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinions. It all started with a single sentence, a jab into the wind on a damp June evening in 2024. Robert De Niro sat in front of the camera, recording a message about the presidential election, and what came out of his mouth was a Molotov cocktail thrown into the political arena. He was so reckless that he spoke in a deep, gravelly voice, every word dripping with disdain. He called him a thug, a dog, a pig, a fraud, a fool who didn't know what he was talking about. I wanted to punch him in the face. He was talking about Donald Trump, and De Niro didn't hold back. The video went viral on the internet like a thunderclap, garnering millions of views and being shared by people who saw him as a hero against a bully. At the time, De Niro was the untouchable good guy, the Godfather, Taxi Driver, Angry Bull. He had built an empire of respect, a career that spanned decades and shaped generations. He could say anything, and the world would listen. Years passed, and De Niro remained unwavering. He appeared on stage at the Tony Awards, the lights shining bright, the crowd buzzing with anticipation. He was introduced as a legend, a giant of the screen. He walked up to the microphone with the demeanor of a man who knew his worth. "I'll say one thing," he said, pausing long enough for the tension to make his voice steady yet defiant. "To Trump." The audience erupted, some shocked, some exhilarated, many jumping to their feet in applause. "Trump is no longer the weak one," he added, doubling down as the cheers grew louder. "That's Trump." The cameras captured every second, broadcasting to millions, and once again the internet went wild as he walked off the stage with his head held high. That night marked a turning point, not of triumph, but of trouble. He had often spoken loudly about his hatred for the former president, but this time felt different, sharper, as though the universe had heard him and decided to punish him. His life began to unravel the moment those words left his mouth. What followed was not just a bad week or a tough period, but a slow and brutal descent into a nightmare. Everything he had built, the first signs of trouble appeared quickly just a few weeks after his protest criticism, as whispers began to circulate around Hollywood. De Niro had spent decades becoming a giant, a name that could sell tickets on its own. A guy who could walk into a room and make everyone stop talking just to look at him, but now the atmosphere around him was shifting. The studio executives who used to kiss his ring were now avoiding his calls. His agent, a scrawny guy named Paul, who had been with him since the early rebellious days, started to sound nervous on the phone. "Bob, this isn't personal," Paul said one July afternoon, his voice gravelly over the line. As De Niro sat in his penthouse apartment in New York, staring out at the skyline, Paul continued, "It's just that the current climate is really weird. People are sensitive about Trump, and it's making everyone upset. Dairo gripped the phone tightly, his fingers turning white. He shouted back, "What are they mad about? I told the truth. Let them be angry." He slammed the phone down in frustration, but deep inside, a flicker of worry ignited. He had always been a warrior, but this felt different, like punches were coming from everywhere and he couldn't see who was throwing them. That flicker of worry turned into a blaze when Alto Knights started to take shape, a $45 million gamble that promised to revive his fading star. It was a bold opportunity. He would play not one, but two mobsters in the film. The anticipation was electrifying. A chance for the man who brought us Goodfellas and Casino to prove that the fire that once lit up the screen was still alive. And for Warner Brothers Studio, desperate for a hit, it was a calculated risk worth taking. However, the opening weekend revenue crashed into the broken dream with a horrific loud thud. $3.2 million from 2,651 theaters, a pitiful $1.26 per screen. Just enough to keep the projectors running, the total global revenue sank to a mere $5 million. A $40 million hole in the budget before marketing costs were even factored in. The weight of that failure dealt a devastating blow to a man who was once untouchable. This wasn't just a failure, it was a catastrophe, exposing a painful truth. The king of gangster films had fallen, and he was falling hard. The first signs of trouble appeared just weeks after his protest comments. Whispers began circulating in Hollywood. De Niro, who had spent decades as a giant, was now facing a very different reality. A name that could sell tickets on its own. A guy who could walk into a room and make everyone stop talking just to look at him. But now, the atmosphere around him was changing. The studio executives who once kissed his ring were now avoiding his calls. His agent, a lanky guy named Paul, who had been with him since his early rebellious days, started sounding more and more worried on the phone. "Bob, this isn't personal," Paul said one afternoon in July. His voice was raspy through the line as De Niro sat in his penthouse apartment in New York, staring out at the horizon. "It's just the current climate. Everything's so sensitive. Trump's issues are making people angry." De Niro gripped the phone so tightly, his knuckles turned white, and snapped back. "What are they angry about? I told the truth. Let them be angry." He was so angry that his chest tightened, but deep down, a flicker of worry sparked within him. He had always been a fighter, but this time felt different, like punches were coming from everywhere, and he couldn't see who was throwing them. That flicker of worry turned into a flame as Alto Knight began to take shape, a $45 million gamble that promised to revive his fading star with a bold twist. He would play not just one, but two mobsters in a film, and the anticipation was electrifying. A chance for the man who gave us Goodfellas and Casino to prove that he still had the spark that once lit up screens worldwide. For Warner Brothers, a studio hungry for a hit, it was a calculated risk worth taking. But when the numbers from the opening weekend crashed with a deafening thud, $3.2 million from 2,651 theaters, a pitiful $1.26 size per screen, there was barely enough to keep the project running. The global total revenue plummeted to just $5 million, leaving a massive $40 million hole in the budget before even factoring in marketing costs. The weight of that failure felt like a crushing blow to a man once considered untouchable. But now, it wasn't just a failure. It was a disaster, exposing a painful truth. The king of mob movies had fallen, and he was descending in a spectacularly disastrous way. The story of Alto Knights started with great hopes, but from the moment the trailer appeared, something felt off. He was heavily made up, wearing fake props, growling lines like, "I'm a gangster, that's it, that's all." But instead of intimidating, it came off as awkward, almost laughable. Online conversations turned brutal, with people mockingly commenting that it looked like De Niro was shouting at his own reflection. The marketing campaign was equally chaotic, barely getting a whisper on TV. The critics later slammed the film, giving it just 38% on Rotten Tomatoes, calling it a boring repeat of a genre De Niro had once mastered. While 70% of the audience felt empty, propped up by a small, loyal group, it was overshadowed by millions who chose not to watch the movie. The film itself was a failure, no doubt about it, and that stage had collapsed. In the years since De Niro started letting his off-screen anger overshadow his on-screen brilliance, by 2024, his criticisms of Donald Trump and his supporters had reached their peak. "I want to punch him in the face for the Trump defeat." The Alto Knight, instead of retreating to lick his wounds, he continued to vent his anger on Variety. "It sounds like a scream. I think it's pretty clear where the self-proclaimed know-it-all critics are coming from when they criticize our film. Focusing on the life of a gangster, it's pretty clear now that we know that we're dealing with the MAGA crowd that has one mission in mind, and that is to destroy cinema and destroy entertainment for other people who want to see a great work of art like the Alto Knights." "I think it's an honor to be part of this wonderful movie." Those words dripped with challenge, but they were made like a plea. When he added, "It's truly Trump's fault that cinema is dying right before our eyes," the desperation was clear, a man clinging to a story that absolves him of guilt. The immediate reaction was fierce, intense, and unforgiving, shining with contempt. One user wrote, "He's blaming Trump for a movie no one wants to watch." Meanwhile, another person said, "De Niro has lost it." And so has his audience. The bitterness of those words cut deep. The public backlash echoed far beyond the loyal supporters he had once courted. This opposition was not just noise, it was measurable. A wave of indifference swept over a man who once easily filled movie theaters. A YouGov poll from early 2025 showed that 62% of Americans now have an unfavorable view of De Niro, a sharp drop from 78% who admired him a decade ago. The classic films The Godfather Part 2 and Raging Bull have seen a dramatic 34% decline in online viewership since 2020, according to a report by Nielsen, with fans admitting they can no longer separate the art from the artist. An old post summed it up. "I hear him call me trash every time I try to watch Goodfellas." This wasn't the first warning sign. His 2024 Netflix series 0 Hour failed, ignored despite his desperate pleas for attention. Producers begged him to stay away from politics during his press tour, a request he ignored, instead choosing to criticize Trump. Now, with Alto Knights, that self-sabotaging behavior has reached its peak, and Warner Brothers lost over $60 million from the film's failure, factoring in marketing costs. Having seen enough, they severed ties with him months earlier, citing declining box office revenue, according to Hollywood Reporter. It was a decision that seemed cold, but was inevitable after this latest disaster. The contrast is stark. Goodfellas earned $47 million in 1990, over $100 million today, with a $25 million budget, while Alto Knights couldn't even make a tenth of that. An enormous decline that left audiences stunned, mourning the loss of a giant seemingly determined to bury himself. The burial became even more tragic, because at 81, De Niro couldn't foresee it. He still sees himself as the giant of a bygone era, pouring his soul into the Alto Knights, telling Variety, "The Alto Knights is a film I had to sacrifice a lot of time for, investing in these very complex characters, really bringing the life of a gangster to the big screen." But the harsh reality is that his age shows in every frame. The sharpness he once had has been dulled by time, and the dual role that was supposed to make an impact instead comes off as shallow. Critics noted that both characters sounded like De Niro, loud and irritable. Fans also couldn't understand why they should watch him play two gangsters in 2025 when Casino still tells a better story, told by a younger, hungrier De Niro. Fatigue was obvious. The general audience was tired of the old routine, and Hollywood was fed up with him being on a list of outspoken figures. Stars like George Clooney and Alec Baldwin, whose criticisms often exceed their relevance, have joined De Niro in speaking out. His defense of diversity initiatives, and what some studios are currently doing because of Trump, is equally alarming. The fact that they fear embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion makes it all the more nonsensical when his own film fails without any agenda to blame. This proves that the issue isn't politics, it's him. A man out of sync with a changing world. The failure didn't just hurt him, it drained him. The studio lost millions, and they didn't hide their anger. "You're the reason," an executive told him over the phone, his voice dripping with blame. "No one wants to work with you anymore." He hung up, stunned, unable to respond. Box office sales continued to plummet, and within weeks, Alto Knights was pulled from theaters, a ghost movie no one cared about. He begged the producers for a chance, fought for every dollar in that budget, and now he had failed completely. He stopped going out, unable to face the pitying glances, the smirks of strangers, or the friends who tried to reach out to him. Scorsese had moved on. Pacino's voicemail sent a message, but he ignored it all. "What's there to say?" he muttered, staring at the empty walls. "I'm done." The king of the crowd, the man who once packed theaters, is now nothing more than a joke and a source of shame, as it burns hotter than any anger he has ever felt. If this story has sparked your curiosity, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our videos. Don't forget to share with your friends and family to explore these surprising stories together. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. That's when family troubles struck, hitting hard on March 20th. His ex-wife, Grace, called him with a sharp, panicked tone he hadn't heard since their messiest days of divorce. "Bob, the kids are getting letters," she said, and he could hear her pacing on the other end. Hate-filled, threatening letters, the kind that made them scared. De Niro's stomach tightened, cold sweat beading on his forehead. His older children, Dina and Raphael, the twins, had dealt with the darker side of fame before, brushing off paparazzi and intruders with the toughness he had taught them. But this was something new and ugly. Grace had sent him pictures of the letters. "Your dad is a traitor, hoping he will pay the price." De Niro felt like a dead man walking. "Watch your back." One letter sent to the nanny of his toddler daughter was even worse, telling Bobby that his time was up. He stared at the words, his breath shallow, his mind racing. his youngest child, just 2 years old, born late in his life with a woman he loved deeply, was his weakness, the reason he kept going. Now, she was also a target. He called Grace back. His voice was firm. "I will fix this," he said, but he didn't know why. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the people he would die for, and they were suffering because of his big mouth. The threats didn't stop with letters. 2 days later, on March 22nd, he received a text message from an unknown number. "You should shut up, Bobby." No name, no trace, just the words flashing across the screen like a warning shot. He stared at it for an hour, his heart pounding, trying to figure out who had sent it. Was it a random troll, an angry fan, or something worse? Someone with real power, someone who could carry out the threat. He didn't respond, not knowing what to say. But the message haunted him, burrowing into his thoughts like a splinter. He began double-checking the locks on his doors, then triple-checking them, glancing over his shoulder as he left the building. The tough guy and taxi driver, who had stared the world down without blinking, was now afraid, and he hated himself for it. But the fear was real, and it was growing, a shadow he couldn't escape. Hollywood threw the next punch, and it was a knockout. Warner Brothers, the studio that financed some of his biggest hits, made a move that stunned him. He was lined up for a major mafia movie in 2027, a $20 million paycheck dangling in front of him, a chance to step back into the shoes he wore so well in Casino and Goodfellas. It was, folks, a perfect old-school role that could remind the world why he's a legend. But then the call came. David Zaslav, the executive, was no mincing words. "We're firing you," he said, his voice cold and firm. "You're too risky." Risky? De Niro couldn't believe it. They pointed to his outspoken nature, the harsh criticism that had once won him praise but now made executives nervous. The project was canceled outright, the $20 million gone. He sat in his New York penthouse after the call, his hands clenched into fists. "Stupid," he muttered, incredulous. "They're idiots." He paced the floor for hours, the thin carpet beneath his feet replaying the conversation in his head. He'd threatened to sue. His lawyers had urged them to fight back. But deep down he knew it was a losing battle. Warner wouldn't stop there. They'd pulled him from the flashbacks in Joker 3, a small but meaningful role he'd been excited about, and then dropped him from a 2026 action thriller. 2 missed opportunities, and the phone had rung. Hook fell silent on March 25th when he met Paul at the Warner Brothers LA office. Paul didn't look at him, just shuffled papers and cleared his throat. "They're cutting you off, Bob," he said finally, his voice flat. "Alto Knights is down and out and they don't have any more projects. They call it a business decision." De Niro laughed a bitter, hoarse laugh that startled Paul. "A business decision after all I've done for them?" He leaned forward, his hands gripping the desk. "I made millions, and now I'm trash." It wasn't just a career collapse, it was exile, an exile from the only world he'd ever known. The rejection hurt more than he'd expected. He'd always been a bouncer, someone who turned setbacks into comebacks, but this time the door wasn't just closed, it was barred. He called old friends like Scorsese and Pacino, people he'd spilled blood with on film sets, and got voicemails or vague excuses that he was busy with a project. "Bob," one said, We'll see you soon. Another soon never came. He scrolled through industry blogs and saw his name in headlines like "The Fall of De Niro" and "How One Critic Ended a Legend." The comments were brutal. "He's a dinosaur, it's time to go. No one cares about his gangster shit anymore." He sat there in his hotel room, the curtains drawn, the TV flickering to a late-night talk show he couldn't listen to over the noise in his head. He had devoted his life to nights away from his kids, a marriage crumbling under the weight of his work, a body aching from years of overexertion, and now it was gone. He felt as empty as a house with all its furniture ripped out, and loneliness hit him like a freight train. Other studios began to back away. Whispers of dropping him from a family film were all too common. Paramount passed on a script he had pitched. "He's toxic," he overheard someone say at a party. The words were more poignant than any critic's review. Toxic, the man who gave the world Travis Bickle and Vito Corleone. He couldn't understand it. He sat in his office, surrounded by awards, Oscars, Golden Globes, plaques commemorating a lifetime of work, and felt like they were mocking him. He didn't want to admit it, but he was scared. Scared that the career he'd built brick by brick was slipping away from him. The guilt was a burden he couldn't shake, and it grew heavier with each passing day. And then it turned into something unbearable. His nephew, Leandro, was only 19, smart, funny, a kid with a bright future ahead of him, but one night the phone rang and Dina's voice broke into sobs. "Daddy's dead," she said, barely audible. "Lo's dead." A pill overdose, they said, in his cold apartment at the time when De Niro had left the phone, when the family had gathered for the funeral. But he couldn't face Dina being stared at, unable to speak. All over the front page, De Niro, unk and cruel. The family fell apart as the actor became obsessed, another anonymous source said. Of course, he ignored Leandro's struggles, too absorbed in his own battles to notice the child slowly fading away. The pain of losing his family is a wound that cannot be healed, but the world has not let him go yet. Public humiliation awaits, and it comes so brutally that it leaves him gasping for air. In May 2025, he was awarded a leadership award from the National Association of Broadcasters. He had spent weeks writing a speech, pouring his heart into every word, imagining the applause, the respect. But then the call came just days before the event. "We're canceling it," the voice on the other end said, flat and unapologetic. "Your comments, your reputation, are too divisive." He stood there, the phone pressed to his ear, the room tilting around him. He stayed there all night, the speech crumpled on the counter above him. The words he would never say stared down like a cruel joke. In the morning, the news everywhere lit up with it. De Niro is done, trending alongside old clips of him. Criticism turned into memes mocking Mr. Trump, not Bobby. A post read and received thousands of likes. He saw it on his laptop, each comment a new twist. People laughed, calling him out of date, irrelevant. His latest film, War Can't Fix, hit theaters like a meteor, only to disappear in a cloud of indifference. Released in late 2024, the chaotic political drama about a divided America grossed $12 million or $3 million worldwide against a $65 million budget. Critics panned War Can't Fix, which earned a 23% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with Variety calling it an incoherent, preachy mess that squandered De Niro's earnestness. Audiences stayed away, with the series opening weekend grossing just $4.8 million. A stark contrast to The Irishman's $55 million debut in 2019. By the numbers, it was not just a failure, but a public execution of De Niro's cinematic credentials, when De Niro's name alone could command respect for his presence. A guarantee of intensity and depth from Taxi Driver's dark Travis Bickle to Goodfellas' chilling Jimmy Conway. He built a legacy of 82 films, 2 Oscars, and box office receipts exceeding $5 billion worldwide, according to IMDb data. Directors like Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola have looked to him to anchor their masterpieces. The 21st century, however, has been less kind. Since 2000, his filmography has ballooned with such misfires as Dirty Grandpa, 11% on Rotten Tomatoes, The Family, 28%, and Grudge Match, 31%. Each was a step further away from his art. In 2025, The War Can't Fix is not just a misstep, but the ultimate evidence of his decline. A film so misguided that it fails to capitalize on the polarized political climate it was intended to decry De Niro's downfall. De Niro's downfall is not just box office failures or midnight criticism, but also a loss of credibility. A giant is destroyed by his own choices. His obsession with Trump, evident since 2016, has morphed from righteous indignation into caricature. He is a dangerous man, a fool, and it's a terrible combination that he declared on Kimmel. His face is painted with rage, but the angrier he gets, the less he resembles the stoic genius of temperance. Instead, he echoed Trump's own absurdities, a mirror image of his own insanity when he admitted, "I think he has dementia about us too." The irony was not lost on anyone. The numbers paint a bleak picture. De Niro's last major hit, The Irishman, came out 6 years ago, a Netflix-backed anomaly in a decade of mediocrity. Since then, his films have averaged a 34% on Rotten Tomatoes, a far cry from his 87% average in the 1970s and 80s. His box office receipts also plummeted. War Can't Fix's $12.3 million was a 94% drop from Meet the Parents, $330 million in $2,000 adjusted for inflation. Studios once eager to fund his passion projects now hesitated. He had become a liability. Audiences don't care anymore, an unnamed studio executive told The Hollywood Reporter in January 2025. They see him as a relic, shouting about politics, not an actor. Compare that to his peers. Al Pacino, at 84, still revered for his choice roles in The Irishman and House of Gucci. Jack Nicholson, who retired in 2010, left a good mark with The Departed. De Niro, at 81, still swings the cane and recalls his Trump obsession. A rallying cry that now feels like a crutch. "I felt like I had to say something about it for the record," he told Kimmel, justifying his outburst. So don't let the past get in the way of your future. Don't let resentment and failure kill your passion and talent. Realize that everyone can change, as long as they are willing to face themselves and learn from their mistakes. De Niro, you can still rewrite your story, not only for yourself but for everyone who still believes in the power of art and rebirth. Start today, so that it is not just a comeback, but a powerful and meaningful rise.